Decoder Ring's whole thing is that we crack cultural mysteries. We take a cultural question, habit, or idea, try to figure out what it means and why it matters. And given that we are here in Boston, we thought we would take on a specifically Boston-based mystery, which is, we thought we would take on the mystery of the Boston movie. So when I say a Boston movie, I don't mean a movie that just happens to be set in Boston, a movie that could just as easily be set in New York or Chicago or Toronto. I'm talking about a movie drenched in Boston's particularities, its crimes, its cops, its class conflicts, its accents.
Fucking families dug into the Southie projects like ticks. 3-decker men at best. You, however, grew up on the North Shore, huh? A lottie fucking da.
Mr. fucking clean, Mr. fucking goddamn high and mighty, right?
Yeah, I'm better than all these people.
Yeah,
You're right.
that's
I'm
what
better
you
than
think.
anybody in this fucking
You grew
project.
up right here.
I grew up with him in Southie. Jimmy, his brother Billy, and me. And that is a bond that doesn't get broken.
When the cops gonna learn, huh? This town don't talk.
So there are a lot of Boston movies. Also, I realized I should have done like a content warning at the top to be like, there's going to just be a lot of cursing. Okay, so there are a lot of Boston movies: Mystic River, The Departed, Gone Baby Gone, The Town, The Fighter, Black Mass, and more besides. They often feature an actor with the surname Damon, Affleck, or Wahlberg. There are 2 Afflecks, there are more Wahlbergs, and they've become such a staple that they may not seem strange to you. But I want you to give me a minute to rewild this kind of movie and to point out that it is, in fact, kind of weird that Boston has a cinematic subgenre all its own. And I want to start to make it weird by looking at the whole latter half of the 20th century, during which period Boston appeared in a totally unremarkable number of films. Don't get me wrong, there were movies set in Boston. In the 70s and 80s, you had, among others, The Caper, The Brinks Job, the Paul Newman courtroom drama, The Verdict, the sexy art heist film, The Thomas Crown Affair, and the love story, Love Story.
Hey, I'm having coffee with the real Harvard building. You're Barrett Hall.
No, I'm not Barrett Hall. My great-grandfather just happened to give the thing to Harvard.
So his not-so-great-grandson would be able to get in.
Hey, if you're so convinced I'm a loser, why did you bulldoze me into buying you coffee?
I like your body.
What a weird movie. Anyway, okay, so this was a respectable number of films, but it was not a notably robust one. And with the possible exception of the crime drama The Friends of Eddie Coyle, a movie that film critics in particular love to mention, they're all pretty far from the Boston movie tropes of today. These movies aren't dripping in misdeeds, the working class, or even accents. When Paul Newman played a Boston lawyer in The Verdict, he did not drop a single R. When they remade The Thomas Crown Affair, Boston was so incidental, they just changed the setting to New York. So this was the first era of Boston movies. It was pretty indistinct. But then, just before the end of the new millennium, a new era arrived.
Do you like apples?
Yeah.
Well, I got a number. How do you like them apples?
I actually think there is a whole episode to do about what that quote actually means, but we will leave that for another day. So when Good Will Hunting was released in 1997, it not only turned Matt Damon and Ben Affleck into cinematic stars, it turned Boston into one too. Now, Good Will Hunting is not a crime movie, but a charismatic working class guy from South Boston was its title character, its hero. And in the wake of its success came a spate of smaller movies that also highlighted the city's untapped potential for grit. Monument Avenue, Southie, Boondock Saints. And if you'll permit me now to take a glance over at TV, this is when the producer David E. Kelley, the creator of the Boston-based series Ally McBeal and The Practice, started putting the word Boston into the titles of his TV shows. This is when you get Boston Legal and Boston Public. Boston had cachet. Soon Clint Eastwood was optioning Boston crime novelists. Martin Scorsese was setting his remake of a Hong Kong thriller in Boston, and the city's native movie star sons seemed singularly focused on making as many films as they could here. Films that were, as I suggested previously, disproportionately now about crimes.
370 bank robberies in Boston last year. It's more per capita than anywhere else in the world.
I just mule. Occasionally, not making a habit out of it.
Angel, Lionel, what does that mean?
It means she's a drug runner, B. It means she carries drugs. Isn't that right, Helene?
Oh, my God, a few times.
I don't want to overstate things. There absolutely have been very Boston movies in this era that are not crime movies. Romantic comedies about the Red Sox. Less romantic comedies about a giant foul-mouthed teddy bear. An Oscar-winning drama about investigative reporting into the Catholic Church. But these films goose and boost the overall effect. Boston is all over the movies. And respectfully, as I stand here in your fair city, Boston is not that big. Population-wise, El Paso is bigger. So are Jacksonville, San Jose, and San Antonio. Even when you're taking into account the larger metropolitan area of Boston, Phoenix and Houston are much larger still. And these cities aren't the setting of many particularly memorable films. So how did Boston come to be home to a subgenre all its own? So this is Decoder Ring, live from WBUR CitySpace in Boston. I'm Willa Paskin. In this episode, with the help of 3 guests, we're going to look closely at the history, heyday, and present of the Boston movie. We're going to talk about how race, ethnicity, and class have enabled its persistence just as much as Batfleck and Bulger and all those accents. So today, on Decoder Ring, what makes a Boston movie a Boston movie? Okay, wait here, I'm going to... Hi, so the first guest we're going to have up is Ty Burr. He can kind of come up. I'm going to introduce. We already introduced Ty, but I'm going to do it again.
Hello.
Hi. So Ty is a movie critic who's been writing and thinking about films for over 40 years. He currently reviews movies for The Washington Post and worked for decades at The Globe. He is also from Boston by way of Brookline, which I'll leave it to you guys to decide what that means. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start by looking a little more closely at the earlier era of movies I was sort of speaking of, because I think it will help highlight what's changed. And one of the reasons that there were not more Boston movies before Good Will Hunting is because Boston was sort of a notoriously difficult place to shoot. And I was hoping you could tell me why.
Yeah, one of the reasons that there were not a lot of Boston movies in the studio era and the immediate aftermath of the studio era up and really through the 70s and 80s was that it was a terrible place to come and make films for a variety of reasons. The weather. I mean, Hollywood is invented because people wanted to get away from the East Coast weather, but it's not just that. The unions were particularly notably bad in this town, and I'm talking about specifically the Teamsters, would shake down any film crew that would come to town. And there's a story, and I don't know how much is true, of a food service worker or a grip or somebody getting beaten up on the set of the Cider House Rules, whatever. Hollywood just did not want to come here. And then there's that story that I told you earlier about the Brinks job, which is one of my favorite stories of Boston filmmaking. And it really sums up the attitude of the Boston public toward movie makers. So when William Friedkin was shooting the Brinks job here in the early 70s in the North End, which is about the Brinks robbery in the 1940s, he was shooting a scene on a North End street, and he noticed there was an air conditioner in one of the windows, and the film's set in the 40s and can't have an air conditioner. So he sends a production assistant and says, here's $200. Go give those people some money and tell them to take the AC out of their window. And they did. And the next day, the crew comes back to shoot some more, and every window has an air conditioner in it. And that is Boston. That is absolutely Boston's attitude toward, yeah, okay, fine, give us the money, we'll take out our air conditioners. That and a variety of reasons, there were no real Boston stories, as we will be talking about, that necessitated the film being shot here, with a couple of exceptions. The reason that the Thomas Crown Affair was made here was because the screenwriter was a Brookline attorney who just set when he wrote his screenplay literally on in a day when there wasn't a football game on a Saturday, he just sat down and wrote a screenplay and set it in Boston in very specific places, and they decided to keep that. But there really wasn't a reason to film in Boston until Good Will Hunting came along, and there was a lot of reasons not to film in Boston.
And those movies, I mean, whether they were filmed in Boston or not, the sort of earlier, what is this sort of earlier period of the Boston movie? Like, insofar as they are quintessentially Boston in any way, like, my sense is it's sort of about blue-bloodedness.
Yes. I mean, you mentioned all those other cities that are bigger than us. They don't have the history and the place in the history books and the institutionalism that Boston has, and the roots that go back to the Mayflower, et cetera. And that has a purchase in the American imagination. And that sort of dominated the popular idea of Boston really up until recent decades. Boston was certainly not about its working class, wasn't about its Irish population. It wasn't about South Boston. It was about Beacon Hill. It was about Harvard. It was, that's why you have, even though Love Story was not filmed in Harvard, it's set at Harvard. In fact, Harvard never allows any filming. So all those movies that are set at Harvard are all shot at like UCLA with a couple of Cambridge exteriors.
There was this one movie from 1973 called The Friends of Eddie Coyle that honestly, it's Robert Mitchum stars in it. It's not like a nothing movie, but you really only encounter when you're talking to people about like, where do these Boston movies come from? And everyone's like, have you ever heard about The Friends of Eddie Coyle?
Right.
So The Friends of Eddie Coyle is based on a novel by George V. Higgins, like a crime novel. But can you just tell me about that film? Because it's sort of like the ancestor of these movies.
Yes, it is. And it would not exist without George V. Higgins, who was the antecedent to Dennis Lehane, and who Dennis Lehane goes out of his way to name check as much as possible. George V. Higgins was a Boston lawyer who turned to novel writing. Friends of Eddie Coyle was his first novel, but he was very prolific until his early death. You should read his stuff. His books read like movies because they're really dialogue heavy, and really, it's thicker than any Affleck Damon movie you can imagine. They're really wonderful reads. But Friends of Eddie Coyle was the only one that was turned into a movie while he was alive, and it's an antecedent to the Boston wave of movies that we got after Good Will Hunting, in that it's the first one to really address not just Beacon Hill, but every place else in Boston. And in fact, if you read any of Higgins' novels, they travel all over Boston and are very geographically neighborhood specific. So he really knew the city deep, deep, deep in its bones. And that comes across in its books, but also in The Friends of Eddie Coyle, in the screenplay and the film itself.
So when Good Will Hunting arrives and it's like this pivot point, what is the thing that it is doing? Like how does it inaugurate this new era? What is it introducing to the movies that they didn't have before?
Dramatic class conflict. It's right there. It's there in the title, but it's there in this fundamental idea of a kid from the wrong side of the tracks from South Boston, who is a prodigy and is comes to Harvard, comes to the city's institutions, a kid from outside the institution coming to deal with the city's institutions. And it's right there in that scene that you showed, how you like them apples, because he's showing to some snobby guy that he got the girl. And that attitude, that quote, and yeah, I'll be on that podcast if you want to do that, is very much boiled into the popular personality and certainly the public perception of working class Boston, working class Irish Boston, those neighborhoods, that it's very much up yours. We're going to show you Richies what it's all about. And then there's just inherent dramatic conflict there.
And also just like, because Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were so young and handsome and won the Oscar so charmingly for the screenplay, I think it just sort of seems like it was like, oh, there's this whole world that it's untapped. And then you start to see people sort of tapping it, and then it kind of reaches this imperial phase like a couple years later when Clint Eastwood makes Mystic River, and suddenly it's like, it's really just that feels like it's when the genre sort of like steps into the big time.
And none of which would have happened without Dennis Lehane, I would say. And they kind of feed off each other. I mean, Lehane was able to take George V. Higgins, what he did, and make it take account of Good Will Hunting's popularity and the sudden consciousness that there was another Boston out there that the rest of the country wasn't quite really aware of, and really right to that. And his Lehane's novels are imbued in Southie and Dorchester, and Mystic River takes place in a fictional neighborhood called the Flats. That's basically every working class neighborhood in Boston sort of boiled into one. But without those novels, you would not have Mystic River. You would not have The Departed, which is not based on Lehane, but feeds off of that same thing. You wouldn't have Gone Baby Gone. You wouldn't have The Town. You wouldn't have any of those movies. To my mind, he, standing on the shoulders of Higgins, created this genre that then Hollywood immediately jumped on for obvious reasons.
So you've written about this quite a bit, but like if you had to define what makes a Boston movie, what is the animating thing for you?
I have a certain frustration in that I think there are many Boston movies, and people have been fixated mostly on one, which is the Boston. No, but it's hard not to be that way when, for one thing, we had one of the most charismatic gangsters on the planet running around, running the city pretty much. And not only was he a charismatic gangster, he had a charismatic brother who was in City Hall, was in the state government. And that, you can't come up with a screenplay or a story that's more outrageous than that. And that speaks to this sort of bifurcated nature of Boston as well-behaved and not well-behaved at all, as murderous and very respectable. And those two things are two sides of the same coin. That's one of the things I think Black Mass got right. I don't think that's a great movie, and I also think it had the unfortunate effect of being at the end of the cycle of Boston crime movies. But it does get that weird Bulger brother duality right.
So that was great. That was great.
Okay.
We're going to put a pin in that for a second. We're going to bring Lisa out now. We're going to all, you want to come talk to us? So Lisa Simmons is the artistic and executive director of the Roxbury International Film Festival, which has been running for 25 years and is the largest festival in New England celebrating the filmmaking of people of color. She is also a fourth-generation Bostonian, but does not have a Boston accent, as she just told me many times. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, everybody.
Ty and Lisa also seem to know each other.
We have known each other for a very long time.
Yeah, totally. So it's great. So I want to now turn to sort of thinking about why Boston. We were starting to get there with Whitey and the history, but like really digging into why Boston. I've been like making this joke, El Paso doesn't have its own cinematic subgenre, which I think is funny because El Paso is less known to most Americans. No disrespect to El Paso than Boston for various reasons. But what do you think it's a big question, but like if you have to think about why Boston, what do you think?
I think Boston has this, as Ty was saying, it's this history, it's this gritty history. It's a very much of an immigrant city as well, right? And it's, it is perfect for screenwriting. It is, you have the bad, like Ty said, against the good. You have the gritty neighborhoods, you have the accent that gives it character, you have the architecture that gives it character. So I think that when you have someone like a Dennis Lehane, who's writing about what he knows also, from here, from a Bostonian, that you're getting sort of an authenticity of a story. And there are sort of like real people that you can connect to that. And everybody knew Whitey Bulger. And if you're from Boston, and if you knew Boston back in the 70s, right, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, it was a very gritty city. All over the city, whether you were in Charlestown, whether you were in Southie, whether you were in Dorchester, whether you were in Roxbury. It was a city that was trying to find itself. And it had these different neighborhoods that all of these things were happening. And all of them had their own characters. And so when you talk about Boston accents too, you have to talk about the regionalization, and I hope we're going to talk about that there's a different accent in Malden as there is in Dorchester, as there is in Southie, as there is in Charlestown. But they all carry these incredible characters that you're like, wow, that is like, you want to know more about, because we're fascinated with crime and these things.
But it is interesting to me because I think for someone who's decidedly not from Boston, my sense of Boston is so not like, it's almost like there's two versions of Boston in my mind. There's like the tone, but they're almost like don't overlap at all, where it's like I see the Harvard blue blood revolution version, and I'm not sure I ever would have thought about the gritty crime version but for these movies, so it's like there's suddenly the sea change where like, no, you could all of America should know what Bostonians know, which is that we have this gritty underbelly. But like really that was a kind of revelation of the early 2000s to I think the rest of us. You know?
I mean, I guess it wasn't. And Ty, I don't know. I mean, I don't think. Well, obviously, it wasn't a revelation to us. We lived it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think in every city there's differences everywhere, right? But I do, as I said, really think it's the character of this city, and I think it started maybe with Good Will Hunting. Well, actually, The Verdict. I mean, that is one of my favorite films.
Myself as well.
Yeah, I loved Paul Newman.
Which
in that.
Unfortunately is a movie that was mostly shot in New York.
New York, I know.
Yeah.
But we don't say that. I mean, we did say it, but
You didn't hear me say that.
But yeah, I mean, I think that people want to have this love affair with Boston because it's true. You know, you think of it as Beacon Hill and Brahmin maybe, and the beautiful walking the mall on Comm Ave, and that's the beautiful.
It's funny. I don't want to have a love affair with Boston, though.
You don't?
I don't.
Well,
I
that's
really.
'cause
I
you're
don't
from
want
New York.
I know.
So,
That's right.
But Bostonian. We're Bostonians. We have a love affair with Boston.
You
But
can call it a love-hate affair.
A love-hate affair. Okay, we can call it a love-hate affair. But it is. I just think that Boston has so much dynamic to it, right? Because there are so many different neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods are siloed. I mean, they've always been siloed. They continue to be siloed. So you have different populations in each that carry their own character.
So.
And if I can speak to one thing, I think because the Boston blue blood aspect is so repressive, emotionally repressive, and that's rooted in Puritanism and all of that history, that it causes a heightened reaction among the people who came here later. And I think in that there's inherent dramatic conflict as well.
So you run the Roxbury Film Festival, which highlights not just crime Boston movies, but the work of filmmakers of color. And one of the things that has been observed about Boston movies is how white they can be, but particularly sort of in the moment right after Good Will Hunting, so sort of before the imperial phase, when there's like a Boondock Saints and Monument, at least there actually are a number of movies by and about people of color. And I was hoping you could tell me about them.
Sure, absolutely. So it's really funny because when Good Will Hunting came out in 1997, I believe it was the same time that Squeeze came out, which was written and directed by Robert Patton Sproul, who is a Roxbury native, who basically wrote a film about his life, about being a young thug in Roxbury, and really wanted to talk about, sort of his life and how he turned his life around. And what's interesting is the film is really about how a mentor turned his life around. So they sort of have the same storyline, right? But go in two different directions. Although Rob did get a 3-picture deal with Miramax after he did Squeeze, but he did not get an Academy Award. It's actually a really great film if you can catch it somewhere. But I just found that really interesting that they were both making their movies at the same time, both the same age. They're both basically the same age as Rob and Matt and Ben, thank you. So I just find that really interesting. So you have that, and then really about Roxbury, because Roxbury has its own character. It has its own history. It has a wonderful history from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and then it becomes a very gang-driven history that people have of Roxbury, which it continues to try to shake. It's a beautiful place. Please visit Roxbury. And then after that, you have another film that comes out in 2001 called Lift, which was done by Demaine Davis and Carrie Streeter, also from Boston. About a young girl who works at the Prudential Center and starts boosting stuff so she can buy her mother.
Played by Kerry Washington.
Yeah, played by Kerry Washington, like her second film that she did here in Boston. So there are these other films that are going on at the same time, and at the same time that movie was made, Blue Hell Ave was being made by Craig. So yeah, I mean, I think that we can't sleep on that there were also these movies that were being made in different neighborhoods of Boston that were telling stories, sort of these same sort of like crime stories and these coming of age stories. A lot of them were young kids who were trying to figure out how to deal with gangs and get out of the gang culture that was actually happening and rampant in Roxbury at that time, just like the same thing with Good Will Hunting and The Departed, like all of these other things where you had in another section of town, there's violence in a different way. So, I mean, I just find that really interesting. So, yes, there's a history of those films as well.
If you were to Google or to look into research into this, like why the Boston movie yourselves, you would find actually a number of pieces that are sort of like flippantly like, duh, it's about race, because you get to have white criminals in Boston. Like there's a very funny Gawker piece about how they need to stop making these movies that sort of does that flippantly. And then A.O. Scott actually gave a quote about it. The fact is, Hollywood always prefers to make movies about white people, and it is more comfortable making films about white criminals than black criminals. If you wanted to find a white underclass, you can find it in Boston, Southie, Charleston. So I'm curious, like, how much do you guys think race or its absence is like one of the big whys of the Boston movies' popularity? You're like, rock, paper, scissors?
I mean, I think that's interesting, though, what you just said about how people are like, what, white crime? I'm going to, like, you know, it's, I don't know. It's like has this difference to it. It's almost like people are like, well, of course we know black people do crime, but white people do crime? It's like, you know, yeah, let's watch that. That's like, you know, these criminals, they're getting away with everything. And so, I mean, I don't know. Is it a race thing? Is it a Ty?
Thanks. Yes, it is. And I think that it is a race thing by the fact that Boston's black population is invisible in mainstream Boston movies. The ones you talk about are wonderful movies, but they are little known outside of even the black filmmaking community or Boston filmmaking community, even in Boston, and virtually unknown around the rest of the country. Why is this? Well, I think, you know, as in many American cities, but especially in Boston, the black population has been redlined and just absolutely marginalized. And it's not part of the story in the public imagination of what Boston is, the wider American public imagination. And that, I think, absolutely is due to their exclusion from Boston's history and Boston's government until recent years. So that, you know, when you see in, I think it's Gone Baby Gone, and Morgan Freeman plays the mayor, and anybody from Boston goes, that's not going to happen. You know, so, and as I think I said to you, I've always felt that the ultimate Boston movie, the one that really would be truly and totally about Boston, would be about the busing crisis, and nobody here would want to see it. Because
right, and we've
we
certainly
don't
seen a number of those films in the documentary version,
yes,
but not necessarily in the narrative version.
Right.
I guess I am sort of surprised that it isn't more the elephant in the room. It is sort of, I think it is a little bit part of Boston's reputation nationally that, like, Boston is infamously very racist.
I mean, I do think it's an elephant in the room. I think that, as Ty's saying, it's sort of like been erased. It's like doesn't want to be part of Boston's history. That Boston's an immigrant city of Irish and Italians, and are black people part of that immigration story? Oh no, I don't know. You know what I mean? So it's sort of like, let's tell this story because it's a more interesting. It's more mainstream. It's a easier story to tell. The story of Boston's black history isn't as easy to tell, right? And so I think that it's easier to sort of like push it aside and have people make documentary films about it, or push aside the films like Squeeze and Lift and Blue Hill Ave to be like, that's not Boston though. That can't be Boston. You know, I've been running the film festival for 27 years, and I still have filmmakers that come to Boston and say, there are black people in Boston? And I'm like, yeah, like a lot of black people in Boston. And because the history doesn't tell it. The history on television doesn't tell it. The history in movies doesn't tell it. The history in books doesn't tell it.
Whereas in New York, it does.
Yeah.
In other cities, it does. And I'm just...
because I think it's a much more... They're more transient cities, maybe. I'm thinking, you know, Boston has that deep history of being like, this is who we are. You know, the Mayflower, Paul Revere. You know, the Native American community is completely washed away, too, is also erased. And maybe it's because it's a history where people have stayed here. People don't move in and out of here. So you can stick to one group of people and keep telling that story. Where somewhere like New York it's a constantly transient city. It's a much larger immigrant city of people coming in and out, and those stories are stories of people moving in and out of a city instead of a specific group of people, except for people with strong New York accents.
Well, one of the things also that it's like the sort of the siloing of neighborhoods, like the segregation of Boston, and it sort of gives plausible deniability to these movies to be like, no, we're just about this neighborhood. So of course, like we aren't. or it's realistic that they wouldn't, that, you know, like to the Black Mirror point, like it's realistic that they wouldn't have, you know, have a Black person in their group of friends. And so then you just get to keep.
Yeah, but I do think that, say, for instance, now Dorchester, South Boston, is a place that the rest of America knows in a way that the rest of America knows about Harlem, you know, which was a Black neighborhood, but also had a cultural contribution on many, many levels that Roxbury didn't on a national level, or you know, one that drew white Boston in the way Harlem drew white New Yorkers in, you know, in the 30s and 40s, et cetera.
Right, and I think that's true. But there was a strong cultural Black population in Boston. You know, from the 40s on. You know, really, it contributed a lot in theater. So, but it's just not what we see. It's just not what we're seeing.
To change the subject quite a lot.
Oh,
there is this one other thing about the Boston movie that we've alluded to, but haven't. I mean, there's many other things, but one is just like the movie stars, right? Like, I mean, the fact that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Mark Wahlberg all are from Boston and love Boston and want to make movies here seems to me to be like a stroke of luck, but also so elemental to the fact that there are so many of these movies. I mean, except for Mystic River, like they're involved with like almost every single one, you know? Do you have a favorite? What do you think about them?
Well, I mean,
a favorite star or a favorite movie?
A favorite of those. We're going to get to the favorite movies. I just mean of those actors. We could take it in any direction you want, though. You seem partial to Ben Affleck as the city avatar.
I find when Matt Damon and Ben Affleck come to fame and then just like go in radically different directions in the public imagination, where Matt Damon just sort of is on the steady course upward with great choices in film roles and just seems like a steady guy, whereas Ben Affleck is making itself look like an idiot with Gigli, and then is winning an Oscar for Argo, and then is in the Doghouse, and then is great. And we all have friends like that, right? And we all have maybe relatives like that. And I just love that duality. They're the best friends, and one of them's kind of a screw up, but really talented, and one of them is just steady as you go. You know, and which one's more interesting? Which one's maybe doing greater movies? Probably Damon. Which one's more interesting? Affleck.
So we've talked about, we talked about the history. We've talked about class conflict a little bit. We can maybe talk about it more. We've talked about crime, Whitey Bulger. We've talked about celebrity. We've talked about race. Are there, when you think about why, I have one more why for sure, but before I get to it, like, are there any other whys of Boston, you think, that we haven't hit on?
I will, maybe I'm stealing your thunder here, but I will say the accent is, and nobody gets it right. Nobody gets it right. And I remember interviewing Laura Linney for the Boston Globe around the time of Mystic River, and she says there are two accents that when an actor hears they have to do, it sends a chill down their spine. One is South Africa, the other is Boston. But it also marks us as exotic. Yeah. It's unusual. I mean, everybody knows a New York accent. It's Bugs Bunny, you know? Yeah. But a Boston accent especially...
It's Bugs Bunny? What do you mean?
Yes. It's Brooklyn.
Okay.
It's Brooklyn.
We have a variety of accents as well.
So do we.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
I know, but it had never really been, again, gotten purchased in the public imagination until these movies showed up.
Although we're going to get into it, I mean, there is sort of like the JFK of it all, like that.
You know, that's
I know
that's completely totally different. Yeah. I mean, I think it's because you do have the Ben Affleck and you do have the Mark Wahlberg, and they're we're telling their stories, right? So they're the ones that are making things happen here. I think that's why a lot of those movies get made. Then you have, like I said before, Dennis Lehane and William. George Higgins and William Mahoney, who did Departed. Yes. So you have who was also from Dorchester. So I mean, I think that, like I said, those are great crime stories. They're going to get made here. You have celebrities who want to come back home and make those movies, so they get made here. And then you have the Boston accent. I can't even do it. See, Boston, which
brings our next guest, who's going to talk about all this so much more authoritatively than we are, Danny Erker. Danny Erker is a linguistics professor at BU, and he is a sociolinguist whose research is largely about Spanish-speaking Bostonians, but he also knows a lot of things about Boston accents, as you're going to hear. It's pretty fun. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So just like to start with one of those like sneaky hard questions that's like define, art or something. What is a Boston accent?
Sure. So I guess I would say the phrase Boston accent is an informal way of referring to the ways of speaking English of people, certain people, who were born and raised in New England. And the reason why I say New England and not just Boston is that there are people who have the so-called Boston accent throughout the greater New England area. And it's a variety of American English. Linguists tend to refer to it as New England English. It's a variety of American English that is characterized by the co-occurrence of a number of linguistic features, okay? So
we're going to get into them, but okay, they make it very hard. Like, why is a Boston accent? So why does Laura Linney have blood, like her blood runs cold to hear she has to do it?
And Jack Nicholson.
Well, I'm not sure who you refer to when you say they make
Actors.
it really hard. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, the actors don't like it. Well, the actors don't like it because they haven't had it explained to them by a linguist.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay.
Sure. Well, I mean, will you humor me a metaphor maybe to frame this? So when you're talking about a variety of a language, whether it's regionally delineated, ethnically delineated, socially delineated, it's helpful to think about food, in my opinion. And in the same way that you can think about a cuisine having its distinctive flavor as the result of the co-occurrence of a number of ingredients, it's quite comparable with respect to varieties of a language. So if you have a regional or national cuisine, like Indian food, broadly construed, right? You're going to have coriander and garam masala and cumin and a number of other things, right? It's the co-occurrence of the features that gives it its distinctive flavor. And the levels of the amount of those features, the amount of ingredients, as it were. So when it comes to a regional variety of a language, what you have to identify are its key ingredients, right?
So what are the key ingredients of a Boston accent?
Sure.
Well, you don't even like the word accent. What's the right word?
I don't like the word accent because it's judgy. And linguists are not judgy. If you find a judgy linguist, they should have their license revoked. We don't actually have licenses. But as I have said to my family for years and years, linguists are not the grammar police. Yeah. We are more like biologists who are interested in observing language in the wild, right? So when it comes to the constituent features of New England English, there are words that people use, and there are structures that people put together, and sounds that people produce. Now, both Ty and Lisa claimed that they don't have a Boston accent.
Oh, no.
Here he comes. Here he comes.
Okay.
But so we're going to put them on the spot just a little bit. So, Ty, and don't overthink this, on the count of 3, what do you call the little rainbow candies that go on top of ice cream?
Jimmy's.
Good boy. All right. So most people who are not speakers of New England English call them
sprinkles.
Good. Okay. If you are a person who says Jimmy's, you probably are a speaker of New England English. If you are a person who uses the word wicked to mean very, you're probably a speaker of New England. Well, you are, but those types of features, these words, these vocabulary items, they're interesting and easy to point out, but it's really the sounds that give Boston English, New England English, its distinctive flavor. And there are several of them. Would you like me to?
Let's do the park the car in the Harvard yard.
Sure. We can do that.
I said it wrong. I said it right, but
you
I
said it is what matters, right? So again, no wrong, no right. Just language. So if you ask folks to impersonate a Bostonian, right, the stereotypical phrase that you'll hear from some people is, and I'm going to say it like me, which I'm from St. Louis, Missouri originally, so I would say, park the car in Harvard Yard, right? But let's put Lisa on the spot again. Can you do it for me as a good old-fashioned local?
Park the car in Harvard Yard.
Good work. Okay. So there's a couple things to point out here, right? And this gets to this question of why is it so hard, right? So when we were in the green room chatting before, Ty mentioned this word that will be useful for us, and that is rhotic or rhoticity. It's a word that linguists use to describe R-like sounds. Okay, so there's a whole lot going on with R's in New England English. There's two main things to understand. It seems like sometimes speakers of New England English don't produce their R's, and then it seems like they put them where they shouldn't be, right? So it seems like they're deleting them and adding them. And this phrase, park the car in Harvard Yard, is a great example to zero in on this. There's also something else happening with that phrase. So the vowel in park, the ah, is actually of a different quality. So maybe, can I get the audience to do something?
Yeah.
Is this okay? All right, so everybody just say paw for me.
Pa.
I heard some fronted ahs already. Keep them back like this. Paw.
Pa.
Now move your tongue forward so it becomes pa.
Pa.
Good. So instead of park, we have to move our vowel front, pa, and then don't produce the R. So say pack.
Pack.
You got it, okay? And we can do that to the vowel in pack, the ka, okay? But here's the tricky bit. The R at the end of car in this phrase is special because the sound that comes after it is a vowel. Car in, okay? If you are someone who deletes their R's and you have to bring it to the auto mechanic because you need a new carburetor, you will very likely delete the R at the end of car because the sound that comes after the R is a B. It's a consonant. Carburetor. Perfect. But if you have a vowel that comes after the R, you're not allowed to delete that R. You have to link the two vowels. So it's park the car in Harvard Yard. So it's not deleting all of your R's, right? It's deleting those R's that are syllable final, that have consonants after them. If you have two vowels, you're not allowed to delete that R.
In fact, you even put one in sometimes.
Good. Nice setup.
Thank you.
Yes. So there is R deletion, there's R linking, and then this last one is what sometimes called intrusive R. So if you have two vowels together. So, in fact, Matt Damon was on the James Corden show, and James Corden said something like, do me a little Boston whatever. And Damon said, okay, here's the deal. If you're asking where our mother is, we say, is Ma downstairs? Right? Is Ma downstairs? Okay? But if she's upstairs, you would say, is Ma upstairs? So you have to put that R in there to resolve what linguists call hiatus. We love terminology. So you have to resolve the hiatus by putting an R in. So it seems like New England English speakers are chaotically deleting and inserting R's, but they're not. It's highly rule governed, highly systematic. And unless you have someone explain this to you, it's going to be an absolute disaster to try to.
And that's why we're wicked smart.
There you go.
Wait, there's honestly there's many. You use the word salience.
Yes.
So like there's ones that are sort of more ingredients that are more important.
Yeah.
To enact. So I mean, how many? My sense is that there's actually like a lot of ingredients in a Boston, like upwards of 10, like a lot of them. But there's certain ones that are the R is really important, but there's others.
Absolutely. Yeah, so you could definitely create a hierarchy of social salience, as it were, for the constituent ingredients of the variety, for sure. And words like wicked and roticity, they're at the top of the mountain. But then there are some more modest features that are just as important to the overall sauce, if we want to beat this food metaphor to death, right? Do you want to give some examples of some others?
Yeah, sure.
Sure. Okay, so there are, for a lot of folks in New England, 3 ways of saying Mary. So you have the name, Mary. I'm going to say them all the same because that's natural to my phonology, my sound system. So the name Mary, then wishing someone a happy Christmas, and then nuptials. Okay, so in New England, do you have this 3-way distinction?
I have 2 of them.
So, Ty, you do? Yes. Give it to me, man who doesn't have a Boston accent.
I want to hear this.
There's Mary, my friend.
Yep.
There's Mary.
Uh-huh.
That's when you go out and you wed somebody.
And the one in the middle?
And there's Mary.
Good job.
Yeah.
You absolutely have New England phonology, my friend.
I am never going to speak again in my entire life.
No, it's just...
Yeah.
So, Merry Christmas, Mary. Everybody try it with me. Mary. Yep. Mary the friend.
Mary the friend.
Merry Christmas.
Mary.
And then marry.
Mary.
Good. So the 3-way Mary distinction, a phrase you probably didn't think you'd hear today. The 3-way Mary distinction is another feature. And there are many more. I can keep going.
I know.
If you have an appetite.
You know what I'm thinking? I'm thinking he should have been in that Goodwill Hunting scene at the bar.
Yeah.
Well, I did. There's two just like quick things I want to know about accent. The accent. One is that I think there's a stereotype that it only belongs to white working class Bostonians, but that's not the case at all, right?
It is not the case at all. Last fall, I ran a course called Language Variation and Change that I've run a few times, and the students in the class, we carry out a group research project where we look at archived speech and also more contemporary speech in podcasts and things like that across folks who are born and raised in Boston from the early 1900s all the way until the 1990s. And we noticed 2 really interesting things happening. So folks who were born in the early part of the 20th century, they have all of these canonical features, and they're not just white folks, right? So there's a very famous and pretty awesome politician named Mel King, who had a very large influence on. His folks were from Guyana and Barbados, so he's Caribbean in ancestry. But he, in the Boston milieu, would certainly be recognized as a black Bostonian, and he has a number of these characteristic features. So the one thing is that these features characteristic of New England English speakers are not restricted to white working class individuals. That is part of, I think, the popular imagination. But something else that we have noticed, and we're not the first to notice this, there's great work on New England English being done by a person named Jim Stanford at Dartmouth University. But what Jim's work showed and our research corroborated is that Boston is actually becoming artful again. So this happened in New York City starting in their 50s and 60s. What used to be an R-less city is now an R-full city, and that's happening in Boston, such that people like our former mayor, Marty Walsh, is a card-carrying New England English speaker, but other famous Bostonians born later, like Chris Evans, sounds very much not like a Boston native.
Well, this actually, we're going to take some audience questions, and it's very germane to this, which is that essentially, like, is the Boston accent going away? Do you think it's less prevalent now for various, it's on TV, it's on, I think my sense is regionalism in general is sort of on the wane, but what's happening to the Boston accent?
Sure. You want to do that now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the major trends with respect to global languages in the world, English included, is that their regionalness is starting to erode, which is to say specific regional or class-based or ethnically based varieties are under threat, as it were. You're getting leveling out of distinctive linguistic characteristics throughout the United States. We don't exactly know why this is the case. We have some ideas, but it is undoubtedly the case that regional vernaculars, as linguists like to describe them, are endangered species, for sure.
Well, I'm just going to say, I feel like that is also because Boston is changing. We are a changing city. We are becoming more transient. There are more people moving into the Charlestowns, the Dorchesters, the Roxburys, that are coming from other places. So the people that were there, who were those diehard Bostonians, 4 generations, 5 generations of Bostonians, are aging out, maybe moving to other places, and other people are moving into those particular areas now. So I that's what I'm thinking, is that regionalization is dispersing because the people are changing in those particular areas.
Sure, I think that's certainly part of the story, yes.
And I will say, as somebody who left the Boston area in the late 70s and lived in New York for 25 years, came back in 2002, I could hear it, or I could rather not hear it anymore, in just walking around on the street. I will also point out, I think that it's interesting that as the Boston accent, whatever you want to call the new New England way of speaking, as it is getting diluted and phased out, it's getting enshrined in movies. And I don't think there's a coincidence in that. I think we like to hold on to this idea of this exotic enclave. And I also just want to point out, everybody in this room has their own idea of what the worst Boston accent in a movie they've ever heard. Because we know when it's wrong. And for me, that's Rob Morrow and Quiz Show. Just unbelievably bad. Jack Nicholson in Departed. And we're very impressed when somebody gets it right, which for me would... What? Jeremy Renner, Amy Ryan in Gone Baby Gone, who has I don't know if I could, she has one line of dialogue that to me is the best spoken bit of Boston dialogue from an outsider. I don't know if I can say it in your podcast.
Oh, we already cursed.
Okay.
We already cursed.
Okay. Comes into a room, she says, "It smells like cack in here."
Yeah, exactly.
I love that.
And the other worst one, Blake Lively in The Town.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, ouch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was
yeah.
I have another audience question I'm going to put to you guys. What is the deal with the lack of female main characters in Boston movies?
I mean, it's the writing, I have to tell you. I mean, I'm thinking like Dennis Lehane and others that are focusing on these, male crime, folks. I mean, I feel like that's what it comes down to, is that the women are always written as ancillary characters. And it's not just Boston. It's Hollywood. And, I think that's changing as we're seeing more, women directors and more women writers. And the independent world, I live in the independent world because I run an independent film festival. I work with independent filmmakers all the time. And I just feel like, you're seeing a lot more opportunity for women to be making movies. And so, a lot of these films that we're talking about are male-centered. And the female characters in a hierarchy, in a community, in a culture, it was the men who were the ones that were, the forefront of the family or the group or the gang or whatever, and the women were the ones that were behind them. So I think that when you see these types of movies, that's what's happening. But I feel like there's a bit of a shift as women start to write more and women are given the opportunity to direct.
Yeah, I would love to see a Boston movie that foregrounds a woman character. One of the few I can think of is...
The Housewives of Southie?
There you go. Next Stop Wonderland, which is a movie we haven't brought up here, from the late 90s with Hope Davis, and I forget the name of the male actor. It's basically a non-love story. It follows these two people who come this close to meeting and never do. But what?
The Fighter, yeah. The Fighter's my favorite, actually.
Yeah.
Although I'm not, it's in Lowell, so I'm not sure it's like...
It counts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite. For Amy Adams, actually. Melissa Leo, too. We have one more question, and I was curious, do you guys have a favorite Boston movie? I just said mine. Mine is The Fighter.
I'll weigh in here. Friends of Eddie Coyle, I think, is sort of the Rosetta Stone of Boston movies. It's where it starts. I think one movie I love is Manchester by the Sea. Yeah. Which is not set in Boston, but it is very much attuned to the differences between the North Shore and the South Shore. And thank you. I can put it on when I need to.
You have a Boston accent.
repress it.
But it's about townies in Manchester, and you can argue that there are no townies in Manchester. But I still think that it gets something about the repression and the way people in these parts can beat up on themselves. I think it's a really good movie, and I also love The Verdict. I just think that's an almost perfect movie.
That is probably, The Verdict is probably mine, but I am a huge rom-com. So I'm going to have to say Fever Pitch, as ridiculous as it was. Sorry. But the thing about Fever Pitch, right, is that they made it and then they came back because the Red Sox won the World Series. Right. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I would have to say. I would have to say, and who doesn't love a Drew Barrymore movie? I don't know.
Jimmy Fallon?
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon. Come on. Yeah, not great Boston accents, but, it is a rom-com.
Danny, I know this is not your area.
This is not my wheelhouse. And this is probably a cliched. I'm off the clock for a minute, I guess, linguistically. I really do love Good Will Hunting. And not just because, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are great, but because I think it's one of the most beautiful performances by Robin Williams in a movie ever. And
his accent is terrible.
It's not great. But he's still Robin Williams.
This is when I spoke with Danny before this, he said that he does watch movies with his family and they have to be like, stop talking about the accents. It's an occupation. So that really speaks to Robin Williams' performance if you could look past it.
Indeed.
Thank you guys so much for chatting with us. Thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you. That was fun. Thank you very much.
Give it up for Decoder Ring. Thank you all. That was lovely. And if you liked this conversation, we actually have a very special series right here at CitySpace called Set in Boston, where we talk about all these things, do film screenings with post-screening conversations about all these fun topics.